thinking about it, kind of like brainstorming, and it solves so many issues at the moment, especially if you're buying like nose-tail meat from regenerative farms.
Yeah.
You obviously there's we discussed this in depth on the Andy Morden episode, but you got all this sort of data coming out showing how beneficial regenerative farming is for the environment. It's the highest standards of animal welfare, and also for humans like consuming the meat. But I think like one of the biggest issues at the moment is like as a population we're overfed and undernourished. There's like an obesity epidemic, and also we're extremely like wasteful eaters. So much stuff gets thrown away. So the nose tail for me, it just gets both of the things because it's so nutrient dense that if people were eating that stuff, you wouldn't, because they're eating real food with high levels of nutrients their body understands, it's satiating. So you're not going to overeat liver like you're going to overeat Oreos. It could be a massive solution to that problem. And then also it's almost like these are all offcuts that are going to waste, and just like making people understand that and getting people to incorporate them into the diet, it solves so many problems for me. It really ticks a lot of boxes. So
do you feel it's better to eat the product as is rather than take the caps?
So ideal case scenario, people are eating organ meats in their diet
the entire time.
Well, they're just implementing them in their diet like 3 times a week, maybe 4 times a week.
It's not seen as a strange thing to do just to have it in a meal. So it gets a bit of a rebrand.
Yeah,
which I suppose it is kind of happening.
Yeah, it's happening now. You're seeing it in restaurants in London. Like it's a big thing now because everyone's playing to that, and I don't think people even play into it. It's like with these small businesses, people are genuinely becoming really conscious and aware of what they're doing. So you've got these like restaurants, especially sort of cool upcoming restaurants in London. They're sort of developing this idea, and they're using a lot of offal in their meals. But yeah, I think if you can eat it a few times a week, then that's great. But the beauty of the caps is like a lot of people don't like the taste. And a lot of people, the reality of the situation is, even if they set out saying, I'm going to eat organ meat a couple of times this week, the reality is they don't often do it. So the beauty of having the caps in the drawer is like, if you don't, you can just top up with them.
I find it weird. I'm not sure if it isn't that palatable or whether it's because we don't eat much of it, we don't find it particularly enjoyable to eat.
Yeah.
If you had a kid and you fed them offal from like a young age, whether they would enjoy having it the older they got.
Yeah.
Because it's not. I do eat it probably 2 or 3 times a week, maybe more sometimes. But it isn't my favourite thing to eat by any stretch. Like, it isn't that nice.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that's because I'm not conditioned to eat it. You know what I mean?
So I was brought up on. My dad used to cook liver like once a week in the house. So I love lamb's liver. Like I really like the taste of it. I've cooked it for myself all my life. Like even when I was at uni, I would probably have it once a week just because I enjoyed it. And then when I started sort of branching out, trying other stuff, I wasn't a huge fan of other things, but I've like come to. I'm a huge fan of chicken hearts now. It's probably my favourite offal meal. I'm cooking that like twice a week at the moment. So I think it's definitely like acquired taste you can get.
I think pigs is always very strong.
Yeah,
I had a pig's heart. It was big and it tasted quite strong. Definitely had an acquired taste.
Yeah.
Is there any part of an animal you wouldn't eat?
So I ate brain once, and the thought of eating brain again makes me feel a little bit sick. It's just the texture of it.
What about the arsehole?
And it yeah.
Would you eat?
But I just when we're talking about offal, the whole thing behind it is like super nutrient dense. I'm thinking the arsehole would have a massive amount to offer in the way of nutrients. But mate, the brain is like, it looks like a brain on your plate. You know what I mean? And then it's the visual when you're cutting it up and stuff.
We had offal day down at Exeter Cooking School, and I had a bit of lung. And that was it tasted like I was eating like a kitchen sponge that had been cooked in blood. Very strong tasting blood. Yeah. That was pretty minging.
What animal?
Lamb. It was a lamb. We had every part. It was a 4-part series, and we had one day they did like this shredded every day they did these. It was over the course of weeks. They did these unbelievable meals, like 2-course meals. So we helped cook it and help butcher this lamb.
Yeah.
And the last day was offal day. And it was not good. They made offal stew. I compared to all the meals with this mad like glazed carrots and potato dauphinoise, like stuff like that. And we just had offal stew on the last day. Probably a lot more nutrient dense, but quite rank. Actually, it had this like gelatin.
You think maybe they get out day one, finish with a bang?
I honestly think they just had 3 good days planned, and then they just thought, right, we'll just give them. And then, but
the leftovers.
The novelty of the day was you could try any part you wanted to.
Yeah.
If you wanted to try the arsehole, you could have done.
Yeah.
We didn't. We just stuck with the internal organs.
Yeah.